The case of Odessa follows a 17-year-old female who suffered a hypoglycemic episode while driving, resulting in a single-car road traffic incident. While her accident did not cause any injuries, Odessa was treated by responding paramedics for her hypoglycemic episode. A treating paramedic, Ezra, placed Odessa under an emergency examination authority to justify transport of Odessa to a hospital following her refusal. The use of an EEA in this case undermines the intended purpose of this Public and Mental Health Act power and violates bioethical principles of patient decision-making. A paramedic is authorized under mental health and public legislation to detain and transport a patient to a health facility if they are posing a danger to themselves. This is achieved by placing a patient under an emergency examination authority. For Odessa, to qualify for an EEA, she would have to satisfy 3 criteria. Our biggest question relates to the second criteria, whether or not Odessa had a major disturbance in mental capacity. A major disturbance in mental capacity can be caused by, but is not limited to, a mental illness. The Mental Health Act defines what a mental illness is and is not. Under this broad definition, it can be argued that hypoglycemia is a mental illness. Hypoglycemia can impair cognitive function, causing acute behavioral disturbances, visual disturbances, and altered levels of consciousness. If a patient were to experience hypoglycemia and its associated symptoms, it could be argued that they have impaired capacity. However, it is important to establish that an EEA is a public safety measure and is contained in the Public Health Act. A patient does not need to have a mental illness to be detained under an EEA. The English case of RET informs the capacity is a transient state and can be temporarily impaired by factors such as drugs, alcohol, hypoxia, fatigue, pain, and confusion. Regardless of these facts, Odessa would have to be proven via assessment to be lacking capacity. As Odessa is a child by law, she would have to be assessed against the Gillick Competent Test. Odessa would have to demonstrate comprehensive retention, understanding, evaluation, justification, and communication to be deemed Gillick competent. A refusal of treatment requires a higher threshold for patient decision-making. Regarding the Gillick competence test, decision-making also requires the ability to understand the potential consequences or risks associated with their decision to refuse treatment. This is because the more serious the decision, the higher level of capacity is required. If Odessa was not found to be Gillick competent, she could be assumed to lack capacity and could perhaps qualify for an EEA. As Odessa's hypoglycemic episode resolved by the administration of oral glucose, it would be unlikely that she would have the associated cognitive effects, and therefore she would be Gillick competent, allowing her to refuse transport to hospital. Furthermore, an EEA may still not be deemed appropriate for Odessa, as it is unclear if Odessa would satisfy the first criteria of an EEA. As immediate risk of serious harm is not defined by legislation, however, a person threatening to commit suicide is provided as an example. If Odessa was threatening suicide as a result of a hypoglycemic episode, she would satisfy this criteria. However, merely refusing transport to hospital does not pose the same immediate risk and therefore does not satisfy this criteria. Ezra's decision to place Odessa under an EEA has many ethical dilemmas. Personal liberty is a human right that must be adhered to in the treatment of a patient. Liberty relates to having freedom without the interference of a third party. Placing Odessa under an EEA immediately makes her an involuntary patient and deprives her of this human right. Depriving an individual of their liberty is considered a misdemeanor under the Criminal Code Act. When a health professional acts without consent, they can be held liable under criminal or civil law. In making an ethically informed decision, Ezra should have respected Odessa's right to autonomy, which is one of the 4 principles of bioethics. The decision to place Odessa under an EEA satisfies the ethical principles of beneficence and the non-maleficent, but violates those of autonomy and justice. Autonomy is one of the two ethical principles underpinning patient decision-making. The case of Hunter and New England Area Health Services informs that where there is a conflict between the patient's autonomy and the state of interest in preserving life, the right of the individual and thus autonomy must prevail. By disregarding Odessa's right to autonomy and the refusal of treatment, paramedics also risk damaging her relationship with the healthcare community. This form of restriction often has negative impacts on the patient's cooperation with healthcare systems and thus health outcomes. Rather than restricting Odessa's human rights with the use of an EEA, the treating paramedic should have initially consulted with QAS medical practitioners in relation to her capacity to refuse and her decision to do so. Additionally, management options could have included providing Odessa with low GI food, waiting with her until the tow truck arrived, or transporting her or to a place where food is available. Overall, it is likely that Odessa would have been proven Gillick competent after being treated for her hypoglycemic episode. Therefore, Odessa would have capacity to refuse transport to hospital. The application of an EEA was lawfully and ethically inappropriate. The application incorrectly favored the state's interest over Odessa's autonomy. Consequently, this decision is likely to ruin Odessa's trust in the healthcare system. Treating paramedics could have explored less restrictive and more suitable treatment pathways to avoid this consequence.